Hey, Mike here again with Canadian Musician. Once again, last day of the Canadian Music Week conference portion. And with me is a fellow whose writing I've become a big fan of over the last year or so. First, he's a independent singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and also author, industry commentator, Ari Herstand. Ari, how you doing, man?
I'm great. Yeah, it's cool to be here. It's my first time in Canada, actually. So yeah, we're over the border. It's really, yeah, it's cool to be here. CMW has been awesome so far. So yeah.
Awesome. And like I said, you're kind of a man of many hats. I came to know you through your kind of industry column and advice column with Digital Music News. Yeah. You also run a popular blog called Ari's Take. I think you've also written for Reverb Nation, CD Baby, and author of the new Amazon best-selling book, How to Make It in the New Music Industry. And so you're a guy with a lot to say.
Yeah, that's true. I've learned a lot of things the hard way throughout my music career. I've been a full-time musician. I guess I should say I quit Starbucks as a barista. It will be, let's see, it's just over 9 years ago or so. So I'm coming up on 10 years of like quitting my day job, and I've learned kind of how to manage my music career the hard way. And so I learned so many things. I made so many mistakes, and it got to a certain point where I kind of had a handle on the business. I was making things happen. I was booking my own tours. I was getting songs placed on TV shows. I was making a living with my music. I was kind of playing a bunch of shows. I'd become in Minneapolis, where I started my music career. I'd become kind of one of the. I was doing really well. I was drawing it really well. I was bringing like 800 people to my shows locally, and so musicians started asking me, like, "Oh, how are you doing this? Like, how did you get the song placed on TV shows? Like, how'd you get your music on iTunes? Like, what's the best way to do that?" And so I eventually, I would respond to everybody. And word got out, and especially as I was touring, I would meet other musicians, and I was playing colleges, I was playing high school, so then a lot of the kind of starting musicians would email me questions and Facebook me questions. And it got to a point where I just didn't have time to respond to everybody. I was getting multiple questions a day. So, my brother is a web developer, and my good friend is a graphic designer. So we just kind of put up Ari's Take, and I just put up all the most frequently asked questions and answers right there, and I just started pointing people there. Because I really just started it because people were asking me these questions. There was a need. Like I saw it, there really, when I started Ari's Take 5 years ago, there really wasn't any advice columns out there, or books, or really blogs that were talking directly to indie artists, but from an indie artist perspective, that weren't by companies looking to gain customers. Because whenever there's a company that writes an advice blog, you kind of like read it like, oh, that sounds like good information, but there are ulterior motives here because they're trying to get me to pay them or something like that. So like I didn't launch it to make any money. The first few years I didn't make any money on it. It was just like trying to share the knowledge, really. Yeah.
I guess from that point, when you started the blog till now, and you say you quit your day job 10 years ago, you've developed your career at the I guess as the digital market has really been maturing and changing rapidly. You've seemed to have been doing a very good job of navigating that. But from the time you started giving advice till now, how has the nature of the questions changed you're getting from musicians?
That's a great question. So I guess within the last 5 years, the questions really at the foundation of most of the questions have always been, how can I make more money with my music career, and how can I get more fans, and how can I, gain more fans and engagement? But also the questions definitely have, I guess, evolved to become more nuanced. I think because, a lot of the questions that I'm getting are people who have either already read the book or have read all my articles on Ari's Take, and they have a much clearer understanding of what it takes to be an independent musician in today's world, in the new music business. So the questions have actually, I could say, matured, maybe. They used to be very fundamental. And there are still some very fundamental questions that come in. But it seems like we have all kind of elevated to a level of understanding. And so we're all starting now at a certain place. So the questions, are much more nuanced in the sense they're like, okay, I've been on Patreon for the last 5 months. I'd like to see how I can grow from making $400 a month from Patreon to $1,000 a month. I have 50 fans that are kind of supporting me every month. Now, how can we elevate this? And so it's kind of, we're starting from that level, whereas like Patreon didn't exist 5 years ago, and it's kind of like those revenue sources and ways that musicians can make revenue are constantly evolving, and people are staying on that. And so like live streaming obviously is exploding right now. I mean, with on Facebook Live, but also with Periscope, and YouNow is huge, and so a lot of artists are starting to make actually really good incomes just from live streaming, and none of these platforms really existed 2 years ago.
How do you monetize live streaming?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's this guy named Brent Morgan. Okay. He's making over $10,000 a month just from YouNow. YouNow is a platform that I hadn't heard of 6 months ago, and what this is, reason that we haven't heard of this, and I hadn't heard of it until I met Brent, until I had heard. I mean, there's millions and millions of users on YouNow, but 75% of the users are under the age of 24. So that's why a lot of the the elders, if you say, the post-24ers haven't really heard of it as much. But the thing is okay, so YouNow, it has internal monetization in the sense that it's almost like gamified streaming. So whereas like Facebook Live, you just hit go live and you're just like broadcasting out to your Facebook friends, or if you have your page to your fans. And there's no real ways to monetize that unless you like point people to your store or something like that. Whereas in YouNow, there is internal monetization. So it's like a game. So it's free to watch, but if you want to, there's like a tipping feature, but you don't tip people money. It's coins, and there's a whole internal economy, and there's internal commerce, and so like you can tip. I can basically I can send you a like bomb, which gives you 400 likes, but that costs me $2. But if you get a bunch of likes, then you go up on the ranking system. Or I can give you stickers. I can give you the unicorn sticker, and that says that I really think you're crazy or something or whatever. Or I can propose to you, and with like an engagement ring, and then you see the sticker pop up on the screen. It's like, oh, I gave an engagement ring. Ari gave Mike an engagement ring. You see that pop up here. And so it's all like gamified. Yeah. That's why I think the teenagers are really into it. And so, but as a musician, so how Brent does it is basically he plays broadcast from home. So he has a whole setup where he's playing guitar, he's singing, he's got a nice webcam, a good microphone. So he's rigged it up so it sounds and looks really good. Yeah, great quality. So he's playing, but he's also interacting with them. So he'll take requests. And so they'll say, hey, do you know this song? He's like, oh, I kind of know it. He'll look it up real quick, get the lyrics, and and then he'll play it. And then people will tip him like crazy, or send him engagement rings, or send him coins, or, and so every time they send him something, he gets that revenue. He gets I think it's like 60 or 70% of that revenue. So anytime they send him a sticker or a coin or an engagement ring or anything like that, he's making revenue doing that, and because of it, he's now making over $10,000 a month from that. So Claire Means is actually using Periscope, and she's making similarly thousands a month live streaming. And how she started was busking, kind of street performing on the Santa Monica Pier in California. And initially, she'd been busking for 8 years, just literally making her entire living playing out on the street, guitar kit, tip jar, selling CDs, whatever, just playing. And one day, she set up her phone against the tip jar, pointed at her, and went live on Periscope. And for the first, a few people tuned in here and there, because on Periscope you can kind of like zoom into the map features and just see all over the world like where people are broadcasting from. And so people kind of found her that way. And she had a few people tuning in and out. And over the course, it took her 6 months of setting Periscope up while she busked every night. It took her 6 months to get to 1,000 followers. So this wasn't like a quick thing. She didn't explode. But she then saw that this was kind of turning into something. And she was doing this 4 hours a night, almost every night. She was busking, but hit and go live. And then after that, it started to she hit like this tipping point. And then she was gaining tens of thousands of followers a month. And then she learned like how to really engage with them. And then she would do Periscope from home, but then she still street performs, but now she's making more money from the people who are tipping her and how they tip her through Periscope because Periscope doesn't have internal monetization like YouNow. Basically in her bio, she has a paypal.me link. And so she's like, hey, if you want to tip me, go to the PayPal me link. It's right in my bio. So she'll click it, goes to PayPal. They can tip real quick. And PayPal.me is actually a really cool thing. If anyone doesn't know about this, check it out because it's very simple. It's almost like how simple Venmo has become. PayPal's now trying to compete with that. So they created this PayPal.me link. You can give anyone this link, and that's a great way to tip them. So they tip her through this app. And she is now able to make thousands a month and more money. She like doubled her income within a few months just from Periscope. Yeah. So that stuff is happening. And so, then you asked before like where the questions are. So then we had a bunch of questions come in specifically about this. Like, it's like, okay, so how do I develop on Periscope, get more Periscope followers, or YouNow, or like what's the best live streaming platform? And like, and the thing is, kind of stepping back a little bit, is that, not everything will work for everyone. Yeah. So, okay, for instance, I'm friends with a lot of YouTubers. These are people like my friend Peter Hollins, who he has over 1.5 million YouTube subscribers. He's got hundreds of millions of views and whatever. I see what he does to be a YouTuber. Yes. I've done collaborations with some YouTube artists. We put out some YouTube music videos, and like I've seen the workflow and the process. And I've had a few videos that have done well with these other artists, and that doesn't really inspire me. I don't want to be a YouTuber. I don't want to be a YouTuber artist. So why would I do something that doesn't inspire me? But the beautiful thing about the new music business is there are no have-tos. You don't have to do YouTube. You don't have to do Periscope or YouNow. You have to do what inspires you and what makes sense for you. And that's really different than what the old music business was, where it's like, okay, there's really just one way to do it. You get signed to a label, you go on tour. Basically, that's it, And so but that's what the beautiful thing is right now. Is like, now you can pave your own way and do what makes sense for you. So like Peter, he's supporting his family on the money he's making from his YouTube audience. He never performs. I love performing. I need to perform and be on stage and connect with people in a physical environment. So I go a different route. I see, but like, because of the role that I've kind of fallen in with Ari's Take and Digital Music News and now the book, is like I try to stay up with everything and understand every way that any musician is making a living these days. And I try to understand it in a very intimate way, in the sense that like, I want to see what it takes to do that. So I'll try everything. I don't recommend this for indie artists to just like try everything because you'll waste a lot of time and effort. But I do it because I want to understand it to teach others. Yes. And so like one of the big reason why this book is so huge is because I lay out all the different ways in there. Yeah. So I talk to all these different musicians who are making livings in really interesting, creative ways. And I say, okay, this is how they do it. And now this is how you can do it. And here's like a checklist. Here's a step-by-step of exactly how to do it on this platform or how to do it this way. And then if it makes sense for you, if it's like, okay, this sounds interesting, I really think I could do it like this, and I could do this, and this would inspire me, then go for it. Yeah. And then you set goals. Then you're like, okay, live streaming sounds awesome. I really love engaging with an audience, like a chat box audience online, and I really want to like, it'll give me a time to hone my craft in front of an audience, and I can just perform from home, and I don't really want to tour. So, okay. Then we'll say, all right, check out, YouNow, you can check out Periscope, you can check out Busker, and you can really develop and like go down the route of like how to make this really work. Yeah. And, then you set goals. It's like, okay, in 1 year, I want to be making $2,000 a month from live streaming, and I want to have 30,000 fans. Like, that's an obtainable 1 year goal if you want to do the live streaming route. Now, this isn't something that you can obtain if you just set the goal and then decide to book a tour and like go on the road or something like that, because that's counterproductive to what your goal is. So that's why it's really important that you set a goal and you say, because then you reverse engineer that. You say, okay, how am I going to get to this goal? Well, I got to live stream every day for 4 hours. Then I have to build up a cover repertoire because they sometimes request covers, and I should know and I should be able to play them. I get a lot more tips. It's just like when you're playing a cover gig in a wine bar or on the street or something like that. You get more tips if you play the covers that they request. It's like similar kind of thing. And then you can kind of say, okay, now when I'm not live streaming, I should spend 2 hours looking and understanding this community. So I'm going to tune into other people's live streams. So, similar to how YouTube is a community and YouTubers would collaborate with each other, YouNow is also a community, and YouNowers collaborate with each other. The cool thing about YouNow is you can collaborate with somebody living in a different time zone from you, meaning there's a guesting feature. So I've seen people literally like jam together in 2 different countries because you can just bring in a guest, is what they call it, and then it's a split screen, and then I'm playing, you're singing, and then we're jamming together, and then the audience is like, whoa, this is crazy. Yeah. So, so that's a goal that you set. Then to reach that goal, you reverse engineer that, and you focus, okay, this is how I'm going to do that. So setting the goals for what inspires you and what makes sense for you and your music career, that's number one. And then you can kind of figure out what it's going to take to reach those goals after that. Mm-hmm.
This may be the easiest interview ever because I ask one question and it's good. But in the course of your research for the book, this is kind of 2 parts. A, is there one stream of revenue that you think is being overemphasized in its importance or relevance? And on the flip side of that, could you identify one that's being underappreciated?
Absolutely. Obviously, the entire conversation over the last 10 years has been about digital revenue from recorded music, streaming, downloads, it's always been about that because the entire music industry up until now, really, for the last 100 years has been built on basically sales of a small priced item to a lot of people. And that's the entire business model of the music industry up until now, up until the last few years or something like that. So, and it has been all about, for the labels, the record labels, basically creating superstars that will get millions of fans to pay for their entire business model. And with that business model, though, there's an extremely high failure rate. So,
I've heard that, at least under the old model, it might still be the same with record labels, that on average, about 1 out of 10 albums makes money.
It's less than that. That's like that's a 10% success rate. It's below 2% success rate. Yeah. So if the label signs 100 acts this year, if a major label signs 100 acts this year, only about 2 of them will make enough money to recoup the cost of their advance, and they'll stay on board. Whereas 98 of those artists that they sign this year will get dropped, and they don't make any money. So the failure rate is so high. And with the major labels, that's okay for them because as long as their bottom line works out. But that's not okay for the 98 artists that totally fucked by the label. Can we say fuck? What is this for? Okay. All right. Where is this going? We're not live on the radio right now. Okay. The 98 of them that got totally fucked by the label. And now the label's not just going to say, oh, here's all the rights back to your music. Here you go. Here are your masters back. Now go have a great career. No, they're going to be like, well, we gave you $100,000, so you can pay us $100,000 back for that money that we invested in you. Oh, by the way, we spent 50 grand in marketing, and, it took another 50 grand to just kind of facilitate everything. So, no, it's $200,000. So if you want to get the rights back to your music, what indie artist has $200,000 they can just come up with? So that's the problem, is just like it's really difficult to then basically restart your career, and so many bands break up because of that. So where we're at now, and what is being overemphasized in the industry is still everyone is still focused on sales and focused on digital streaming revenue or just digital revenue from recorded music, whereas I look at recorded music now and yes, we're at a transition point right now.
Yeah.
Sales are, dying drastically. Every day they're going down. But, streaming is skyrocketing. Now streaming has become profitable for labels. But the thing is that it has potential to make indie artists a good amount of money. It's not happening in the interim, but it's not the streaming service's fault. Like, this is not the model
even though they've been painted as the bad guy, that's what's occurred to me is they're losing money. Even though Spotify brought in $2 billion, it lost $200 million because of how much, and largely because of how much it's paying back to rights holders.
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a report that came out that even though they technically say they pay out 70%, Spotify, Spotify really, with the advances and the guarantees that they're paying the major labels, they're paying out around 87%. So when people say, it's like, you got to pay us more, they're like, from where? Like, where are we going to get more of this money from? And the thing is that it's the problem is that the major labels are doing really well. They're, again, they were doing poorly, but almost single-handedly because of Spotify, the labels are doing okay again. Because the only reason that they allowed Spotify to launch in the States and in Canada was by, like, Spotify hit Canada, I think, a year after it hit the States, but it hit the States like 3 years after it launched in Sweden. The only reason why they were able to launch Spotify was because of the labels basically force Spotify to give them equity in the company. It's been rumored that they're in
about 15% combined of the three major labels, I think.
Yeah, 20% I've heard. I mean, it's not like obviously public yet, but it's around there. But also major guarantees up front, advances. So they're paying them advances there, and they have these deals like minimums. So they have to pay them like a couple $1,000,000 a month, no matter what. So like there's all these things that. Indie artists, of course, are not getting that. I'm not getting a guaranteed Spotify payment every month, but like the major labels have the back catalog. So that's how they were to negotiate those deals. So it worked out really well for them. So there's a battle right now in the States for like songwriter royalties, in that like songwriters have been the real ones left behind in this streaming economy, and that is a problem. And so songwriters are paid about 1/10 from digital revenue from what the labels are paid and what the artists are paid. And that discrepancy, that needs to change. So I've always looked at it as like, yes, songwriters and artists should be paid 50-50 on the success of a song. So if, a song sells 1 million downloads or something like that, half that money goes to the publisher and the songwriter, half that money should go to the artist and label. It's not how it works right now. If you get 100 million streams on Spotify, similarly, 50 million of those streaming revenue goes to the publisher and songwriter, and 50 million should go to the artist and label. It doesn't work that way.
Instead, right now, it's about 65% goes to, of what's paid out. Or no, sorry, of total revenue. What I've seen is about 65% goes to the label. Of that, it's determined by artist contracts, though. But on average, it's about 80-20 split. Then of that, with 80 going to the label, 20 going to the artist after they've been recouped.
So that's on the recorded, the sound recording side. So that's on the master side. So if you basically cut every sound recording in half, there's the rights, just the copyright basically. So the rights of this, every recording has two parts. It has the recording and it has the composition. So of that, it's actually about 90% of all of the money that's earned from this sound recording. 90% of that money goes to the label, who then will pay out the artist, or goes directly to the artist if it's indie artist, and then only 10% goes to the songwriters, go to the publisher, songwriters if they have a publisher. So that's the discrepancy. And then whatever the label pays out the artist based on their contracts and everything, and similar to the publisher pays out their songwriters based on the contracts. But within the sync licensing world, if you get a song placed on a commercial or on TV or something like that, that's generally 50-50, exactly. So that's a model that we can learn from how it works in sync licensing, because that's not regulated. So, the U.S. government, at least, they set the laws, and I'm assuming it's probably similar here in terms of that the mechanical royalty rate, which is basically the songwriter rate, is set by the government saying, songwriters are going to earn basically 1/10 of what all the money that's generated from this. And for downloads, it's 9.1 cents for a $1 download. You know, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, that's why it's so difficult to change this. But, of course, the labels don't want to change that because the labels are doing just fine. Yeah. And if they're making 90% of all the money, they're like, well, then we're going to have to reduce our percentage by 40%. We don't want to do that, make 40% less money. Yeah. So that's a problem. And so that's the battle that's happening right now. So, like, while we have, you know, while everyone's battling this out and having these conversations, you know, indie artists have been sitting on the sidelines saying, like, this is all fine and we can, like, you know, work ourselves up into like a tizzy about all this stuff, but we're just trying to have a music career. Like, we don't want to concern ourselves with all of these macro issues right now. Like, yes, we want to be paid more. That's awesome. But, like, because of this, because of all of these problems and these issues and, like, artists not making as much money as they thought they should be or that they could be, they get creative. And that's why Claire Means is able to make money on Periscope. That's why 10,000 creators are making over $1,000 a month on Patreon. Yeah. That's why, because, you know, these models that didn't exist 5 years ago are because one, artists realize they don't need to sign to labels anymore. Yeah. And two, they don't want to sit around while all the governments and the streaming services and the labels and the publishers all battle it out. Yeah. Because, yeah, we could sit back and, like, battle it out for 10 years and then not have a music career. Yeah. Or we could just let the people battle it out and do our part for advocacy when we think it will help, but really forge our own paths and make our own careers.
Part of the pushback from streaming services and even from YouTube, for that matter, is kind of what you're just talking about. They're saying, hey, it's not our problem, or it's not our fault if creators aren't getting money. We're paying out, and it's the middlemen, the labels, the publishers, the collection agencies between us and the creators. They're the ones who are the reason creators aren't making money. That's a somewhat valid argument, I think, but there's also there's a lot more nuance to it, especially on YouTube side of it. But anyways,
where it pays out about 50%, whereas, you know, when Spotify's paying out 87% and Apple's paying out 70%, you know.
And YouTube's also only paying out according to ad action. So it's not even like every view or even every ad for that matter is generating revenue. Right. But anyways, where I was going, because for yourself as an unsigned, completely independent artist, because you've been able to make a good go of it, you're in a good position because you're now collecting 100% of, you know, the royalties on your music. Essentially, what's a differentiation point for an artist between where it makes sense to do what you've done, stay completely independent, versus who it might make sense to sign with a label, whether major or indie?
Totally. Okay. Avery Littman, the president of Universal Republic Records, the largest record label in the world, he said, when asked, how do I get a record deal? Yeah. He said, don't try to get signed, try to become popular first. Yes. Regardless if you want to go at it independent or you want to get a deal or you want to get signed, no one wants to sign an unknown artist right now. So everyone has to start indie. Everyone's got to start indie. Everyone has to figure out how to basically manage their own music career on their own first. Yeah. So so most artists are realizing once they get that, once they understand that reality, and they start to pave their own way and start to figure out how to make it work with their independent music career, then they get to a point where it's like, we're actually doing this okay. We don't really need a label. And right at that point when they say we don't need a label, that's when labels start knocking. They're like, hey, by the way, we'd love to sign you. And then at that point, you can make a decision. Yeah. Okay, is it better for us to go at it on our own, on our own terms, or would a label help propel us from here to here? Because that's what labels are good at, taking you from here to here, not from here to here.
And if you're at that point where you're doing well on your own and don't need that label, even if you do decide to go with the label, you now have a lot more leverage in your negotiations with them.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what you want. You want to get to a point in your career where you don't need them. Yeah. And you can tell them that, and they can say, and basically you want 7 labels coming after you and saying, hey, please sign with us. And I'm like, okay, well, I want this, and this, and I want to own my masters. I want to get, the term is only going to be 2 years, and da-da-da-da-da. And like, no way, we've never signed that deal. It was like, fine, I got 6 others lined up over here. I'm going to go over there. Like, okay, hold on. Come back. We'll talk about this. All right, let's sit down, Yeah. So that's the kind of negotiating power that you want to have. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're seeing deals these days that labels are making with artists they really want that don't look like any deals that they've had in the past.
They're a lot more artist friendly than traditional deals.
Some of them are. Now, mind you, they're trying to make it as obviously favorable to the labels as possible, and only in the sense where you have the most amount of clout can you kind of negotiate those deals. I mean, even a good friend of mine who has millions of fans was doing it independently. He signed to a very large major label, and they promised him everything. And he read like the 30-page initial like pre-contract, and then there was 100 more pages that his lawyer read. And they're like, he loved everybody at the company. They were so excited about him. Fast forward a year later, when the album came out, they put nothing into marketing. They were doing nothing for him. It didn't do nearly as well, but they ended up taking all of his money. So he was making tens of thousands a month in his own digital revenue on his own, and he thought he was going to make a lot more and gain so many more fans. Long story short, he was able to get out of this contract, and he said it was the worst decision of his life. Even though he thought it was going to take him from here to here, it didn't. Yeah. And even an artist like that who had literally millions of fans. I mean, he was he's another YouTube star. Yeah. He thought that a label would help him become a household name, because the labels are in the business of making people famous, of turning them to superstars. And he's like, you know what? I kind of want that.
Making the transition from the YouTube world, which is large, but it's its own ecosystem.
Right. And break into mainstream. Yeah, and break into the mainstream thing. So that's what he thought they were going to help him do. Not only did they not help him do that, he lost the rights to his entire catalog because he signed this catalog with them. So his entire back catalog that was earning him so much money, streaming revenue, everything, now he's not even getting that money. So now once he got dropped, he's been fighting to get that back catalog back. He's like, listen, I funded this. I put this out on my own. And they're like, well, you signed on the dotted line, so screw you. Sorry, And so, like, that's why I encourage everyone not to sign, period. Like, I just heard this story so many times from so many different artists in every side of the industry. I think, like, if you want to sign to a major label, you're almost better off playing the lottery.
The reality is the majority of signed artists aren't with a major label. They're with one of the many, many indie labels.
And that's different. That's a different story because there are a lot of indie labels, and we have to differentiate between the two because the indie labels, there are a lot of indies that really have their heart into it, that aren't all about the shareholders and making, the most amount of money, that do have very favorable splits. A lot of indie labels are 50-50 with the artist. And so
after recuperation.
After recuperation, because, if they front money, but some indie labels don't front any money, to be honest. Like some indie labels are just like, yo, we love to work with you. We can't pay you in advance because we're small potatoes right now, but we have the connections, we have the infrastructure, we have this team of people who's really dedicated and really wants to help you out, and they're almost just like teammates at that point, and that's cool, And then if you can sign a contract, it's like, let's try this out for a year. We'll put out an EP. We'll see how it does. We'll reevaluate after a year. If it doesn't work out, you'll get the EP back and we'll part ways and we'll shake hands, we'll hug it out, and it'll be totally fine. Yeah. There's a lot of those kinds of deals that happen too. And there's no problem, with that. So, the major labels are the ones that really, they aren't as flexible in the kinds of deals that they make. They have those first 30 pages that don't change because it was done by a committee of 10 lawyers that had to write out these 30 first pages, and it's the next 100 pages that are the ones that you can negotiate. And so because of that, the majors are the ones that really aren't flexible. And so, yes, if there's an indie label that's excited about you, by all means, take the conversation, take the meeting, and figure out if it's the right fit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And I guess the previous question, we answered a lot about what's being overemphasized, and we got into this whole discussion about digital revenue. back to what's being underappreciated as a potentially, I was going to say lucrative, but maybe that's not the right word, but I guess significant portion.
I mean, the thing is that everything is being underemphasized in the macro like music media world. So Billboard, you know how many stories Billboard has done about the artists who are making incomes in live streaming? Like none. You know, they're not talking about that. They may run an opinion piece written by one of the artists or something like that. Like, I remember they ran an opinion piece written by my friend Ron Pope, he wrote it 3 years ago when everyone was anti-Spotify. Like, Spotify is the death of the music industry. Spotify is the worst thing that's ever happened, blah, 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 blah. And Ron was like, yo, I'm making a lot of money on Spotify, totally independent. He's like, not only am I making a lot of money on Spotify right now, I was able to go to, I think it was Norway or something, or Sweden. It was a festival in Europe. Go there for the first time in my life, have 10,000 people sing along to every word at my show. He's like, I'd never been there before, and because of Spotify, I'm able to do this. So it's like, you know, okay, Billboard ran that, but it was written by Ron. Like, there's no, the writers there aren't talking about this stuff because that's not sexy. It's sexy to talk about that Adele sold more records than anyone else in 10 years. Like, that's sexy. But what's not sexy is saying that, oh, this artist is making $4,000 a month. Everyone's like, $4,000 a month, that's nothing. But for indie artists, that's everything. That's absolutely huge. And so, like, that's what I have found. So, like, I'm emphasizing that. You know, I will let Billboard and everybody else talk about how many record sales that Taylor Swift and Adele and how the labels are buying and selling and blah, 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 blah. Like, that's fine, and there's a place for that, and people like hearing about it, I guess. But, like, what my book is about and what my blog is about and what everything I talk about is how indie artists can make a living in their own way and can really pave out their own path to have successful careers. So I would say everything's being underemphasized, but that's why I'm, like, discovering this every day in new ways to do it. Yeah.
So anyways, man, this actually may be the easiest interview I've ever conducted because I think I maybe asked like 3 questions and he went off on this awesome tangent. But no, it's super fascinating. And again, the book is called How to Make It in the New Music Business. I know it's on Amazon. Where else can people make sure they find it?
Most bookstores. Okay. So any local bookstore should have it. If they don't and you love your local bookstore, just ask them to order it for you. Support the local bookstores if you would like. It is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I mean, it's pretty much everywhere right now, which is nice. So, yeah, check it out.
I should know this. I'm pretty sure it's also on Music Books Plus.
We have a case. Okay. They have it here. Get it from Music Books Plus. Absolutely. Let's give them a shout. So
if you're an online shopper in Canada, it might be your best bet. Let's say that.
Let's do that. Go to Music Books Plus. I mean, they have a table here and they're carrying it. So yeah,
cool.
Definitely check it out.
Awesome, man. Like I said, I've become a big fan of your writing. Discovered you through Digital Music News, which is a site that I've mentioned a few times in the past that our readers, listeners will have known about through me. But anyways, I really appreciate this. Just quickly, you said this is your first time to Canada and to CMW, which is kind of surprising.
It is, you know. This is my first time. I've only started going to the music conferences in the last couple of years that I've been like writing for Digital Music News and kind of paying more attention to this and been asked, I guess, to speak at the conferences. That was the only reason why I've really started going is because people asked me to speak. But by going, I really enjoy it and I learn a lot and I meet a lot of great people. And so, you know, hopefully I'll come here next year and speak on a panel or something like that and be a part of it. And yeah, it's great.
Awesome. And tonight you're playing, obviously this will be in the past for the people by the time people are seeing and hearing this, but you're playing Sensu Music's party and showcase tonight here in Toronto. But man, it's really great. It's a real been pleasure meeting you. Thank you for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.